Welcome to the Digital Diaries. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Henriette Vogt with us. Henriette began her career in LinkedIn in Dublin, where she started as an SDR and honed her skills in sales and sales development. Returning home to Germany, she decided to advance into leadership, where today she's an SDR manager for Remote. Beyond her professional achievements, Henriette takes the time to drive and advance women in tech and sales, dedicating her efforts to fostering diversity and inclusion within the industry. In this episode, we'll explore her career journey, insights into sales development, and her advocacy for women in the tech sector. Henny, welcome to the show.
Hi, Pete. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. This is a conversation I'm really excited to have. So let's jump straight in. You started your career in LinkedIn in Dublin, which has to have been an exciting experience for someone. What were the key takeaways you took from your time in LinkedIn and also living in Dublin before returning home to Germany?
So I actually started my life in Dublin at Trinity, at the University, like Trinity College Dublin. So that's how I came about living in Dublin. And once you're there, it's very hard not to go into tech if you start your career in Dublin. So naturally, I ended up at LinkedIn, as a lot of people do when they look for an entry-level position. And that's how I ended up at LinkedIn in Dublin. And I would say it was one of the best career decisions I could have made, because sales development is one of the toughest jobs in sales, but it's a really good school. So yeah, it was a great entry-level position. And that's one of the key takeaways, definitely, that I highly recommend to anyone looking to make a career switch or anyone early on in their careers. If they want to test the waters and they're not sure what they want to do, sales development is a good starting point.
I completely agree, having been there. And I think, even if you don't want to make your permanent career in sales, doing a year or two in sales development can bring you a lot of transferable skills, really develop the character in terms of grit and tenacity. So there's a huge, huge opportunity. But after your lovely time in Dublin, which, my hometown, you moved back to Germany and into leadership, and you're now working as an SDR manager in Remote. How has that impacted your professional growth, and what would you look back and go, if I'd have done this better, and I'm really glad I did do that?
Very good question, Pete. I actually, during my studies, always knew I wanted to go into leadership. It was just something I was naturally drawn to. I studied international management, and the point for me was because I wanted to be a manager. And it's a really weird thing to say, but I actually wrote my master thesis on women in leadership and the recipe to success. And I interviewed a bunch of women in the tech sector in Dublin for that thesis. And it made me realize this is a career I want to have, because they're these power women with a family, with financial success. And I was just like, I think that's what I'm gravitating towards. And obviously that doesn't happen overnight. And so, as mentioned, the first step in the process was being an SDR. And then part of the reason I left for Germany, I met my partner, now fiance, getting married this year.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And he's actually Dutch. And he also had been living in Dublin for a while, also worked in tech. And then there were layoffs at LinkedIn. And then it was just COVID. So just time to leave the island. And one of the things was, maybe if I want to move to leadership quickly, it's smarter to go for a smaller company. And so that's what I did. And I joined a Dutch startup called SendCloud, because that was combining my personal life and my professional life, because it allowed me to be in the Netherlands a lot. So that move impacted my growth significantly, because I joined as an account executive with the intention of growing into a leadership role very quickly. And it's exactly what I did. And so some people that worked with me previous at LinkedIn were a bit confused or surprised that I would join a scale up from where I had been at LinkedIn. But in the end, I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for that step. So I took a risk there, that's for sure, but it paid out.
That's a great story. And I think sometimes, in tech, we can get a little bit consumed by the brand of the company that we work for, which, sometimes in these smaller brands, you actually do more and develop more skills in some ways, because like that, I have had that experience working for a lesser known tech company, but you've so much more access to certain things, exposure to product, and go, okay, this is actually why we're developing this, and this is how long this is going to take. And it can really shape the talk track that you're having with your clients. So that's a great story. I really like hearing that. And just to say, you're welcome back to the island at any stage. We'd love to have you back whenever you do come back.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it.
Leading a team as SDR manager in remote, what are your day-to-day responsibilities managing a distributed team, and how big is it, and how do you go about that on a day-to-day basis?
So my team's responsibility is to drive pipeline growth and ensure consistent flow of qualified leads for the sales team.
Mm-hmm.
And so my responsibility is to enable them to do exactly that. Similar to the SDR role itself, it requires several little tasks on a daily basis. It requires hiring, training, coaching them, fostering a positive, high performance culture. It's monitoring their activities, their metrics, having regular one-on-ones with them, developing and refining their outreach strategies, the messaging, the workflows to improve their efficiency, looking at their conversion rates. It also requires cross-functional collaboration. It requires staying informed about the trends in sales and the tools. And I would say the biggest and best part, and it's what gets me excited every day, is just developing young professionals. So yeah, a lot of tasks. It's a very diverse role, which is why I'm very happy in it.
Yeah.
And also, you asked about how many I have. At the moment, I have 9 SDRs on seat and 1 that I'm hiring for, so 10. So it's quite a big team.
Yeah, it's a sizable team for sure. Firstly, that's wonderful to hear you're happy in role, something that I don't think is talked about enough. So that's fantastic news. When you kind of talked about coaching, look, everyone gets a little bit excited about coaching. It's definitely, a passion of mine in terms of helping someone, particularly early stage career when they're figuring things out. How do you deal with the SDR that knows it all and doesn't really need coaching in their mind? Maybe they do.
Very, very good question. So in general, I try to meet people where they're at. And in my team, you have very different personalities, very diverse backgrounds, and everyone comes from different companies. Some have more previous experience than others. So you kind of have to meet them where they're at. And the most difficult part is to identify their gaps. And even though I might see their gaps, to make them realize what their gaps might be. Because if I just tell them what you just mentioned, they might be a bit reluctant to it. So it's about enabling them to see the gaps themselves by just looking at the data, by looking at what their strengths and weaknesses are, by having regular check-ins with them, and open conversation and getting their trust. And then the coaching happens almost naturally in a way, and they don't even realize that I'm coaching them.
I love that, because it's such a fascinating point on, the realization, because ultimately you're talking about kind of a raw self-awareness of, yes, there's a gap. And then the honesty, because as you say, sometimes on a sideline, you can always see something. And that is kind of the perspective that in this case, a people manager has. You can just look at a dashboard and go, okay, here, what's feeding into that? What's the input that should be driving this metric? Okay, that's what the gap is. That's very easy to deduce when you're looking at data, but for your SDR, that may not be as easy for them to see. So that's a great insight and a great tip on terms of how to lead and deal with people management. You gave me a fantastic book recommendation, which I'm nearly finished, Invisible Women, which is it's certainly eye-opening to see things and so many things that I just didn't think of. You yourself are an advocate for women in sales and women in tech and leadership. What initiatives have you led or been part of to help that? And would you say you've seen much change in your career today?
Very, very good question. And thanks for reading the book and enjoying it. Makes me very happy. But to start with your first question, so I've always have had really great female managers throughout my careers, who've kind of taken me by the hand and also have early on kind of opened my eyes to the topic. So when I was at SAP, I was an intern and a working student. I was part of Women at SAP. And so I got like the first touch point with such initiatives. And then when I was at LinkedIn, I was part of Women at LinkedIn. It's a great internal resource and also allows you to network internally. And such initiatives are super important, such research groups within companies, because it makes people feel like they belong, because there's people with mutual values and interests. And so these groups have been instrumental in my growth. And then when I joined SendCloud, we didn't have such an initiative, but I knew from the bigger corporations they do. So it was something I started at SendCloud. And as you know, as with these things go, it's often International Women's Day. That's like the big day when this research group comes through. But it was really nice to kind of start that from scratch. And then when I joined Remote, we already had this type of group, and I immediately joined as a committee member. And so one initiative we've worked on last year together with the people team, we created like a mentorship and sponsorship program. We worked with a tool on this, and we paired women with some mentors. And that's why it may not be, it ain't much, but it does make a difference. And receiving the feedback from women in the company that say, thank you so much for having this group, it makes me feel like I belong. That is the biggest and best feedback we could have received. So in general, there's so many women-focused networking communities out there. I think I'm part of like 4. And there's like women in sales, women in tech, women of SaaS. So if that is a topic that somebody's in, and it's not just that women are only in this group, like there's allies like you that we heavily rely and depend on. And so if whoever listens to this feels like that's a topic that's dear to my heart, or even if it's another topic that isn't gender related, but race related, or, whatever, go seek out those communities, because they will make your job much more enjoyable.
Yeah, firstly, congratulations on setting it up yourself. I know that would have been no mean feat. And I think what's really important with the ally side of it is, I would always consider myself a progressive person, but the book you recommended has been frankly enlightening in a number of areas, and I'm actually telling my wife half of it. She's like, I didn't know that. And it's really, really important. As we said, we've got to talk about these things. And I always like to compare that. I think we're moving in the right direction, but maybe slower than we should. And there's 2 TV shows I think they're both fiction, but they're set in different times. They're basically the same show, and they're Mad Men in Suits. And if you know them, Mad Men, back then in the early 1960s, you'd be calling me Mr. Woods and holding a door open for me. In Suits, Jessica Pearson is a black woman as an awesome managing partner who is a fearsome leader. So we're moving in the right direction, but maybe slower, and it's very unhelpful when certain things set back. But I think it's really important to have allies in those groups as well. How do you bring allies in? Yeah, please.
Could I touch upon, because you had a second question, which was, do I see change? Yes, I do.
Good.
So that's the good part.
Is it good change?
It's slow. And what I'm seeing now that I am in a leadership role is I have a lot of peers, a lot of, maybe some senior, like second line managers that are women. But the higher we go up, if you look at corporations, even at Remote, a lot of the more senior leaders, the C-level, still remain often to be men. And so it's kind of like a grassroots movement where it's so fantastic to see that even if you look at LinkedIn, there are so many more women now in leadership roles than there used to be. So that's the positive change. And now it requires to not only have women in their early careers being in leadership, but also long-term, right? And to see more women on boards, more women in C-level roles, more women in actual decision-making, big decision-making roles within companies. But I do think that will come. Unfortunately, if you have people like Zuckerberg making comments that are toxic, like we need more masculine energy in companies, I think that's going backwards.
And not least in a company that is 70% male anyway. So they weren't even at gender diversity and balancing to begin with. The desire and need for additional masculine energy is quite frankly absurd. And look, I think fundamentally he's really taken a backward step. I think he's only looking out for the shareholder interest. And when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, it was clear that, Meta's loyalty is to their shareholders above all else. And look, it's not ideal, but it is who they are, and we need to kind of work around it. And I do think that's one of the things other parts of tech do really well. Certainly in the companies that I have been in, the advancement for women has been largely positive. Where I spent my longest time before Revolut, Intercom and Salesforce, both very, very positive companies for women in tech and leadership and just including it. And I think we really address on a point on senior leadership for women, because what happens is, you're married, you might plan to, or you're engaged, you're about to get married, you might plan to have children. That may take you out of the workforce for kind of a year or two, depending on how many kids you have. Meanwhile, the male continues working, and it's, they have more experience and all this stuff. And it's like, well, hang on, this is a whole big balanced thing. And again, to quote the book you mentioned, Sheryl Sandberg and Google, we need pregnancy parking here. I can't walk, and like her shoe sizes were two sizes bigger. All these things that are kind of, going, yeah. And as the CEO of Google at the time said, he goes, I didn't think of that. Like, he totally acknowledged it and owned it and said, we'll fix it right away. But that's why we need these people in this. And diversity of thinking is inclusive by nature. And, we want a situation whereby 50% of the population are well represented and society is fundamentally thinking for it. And I think, as we said, there's a lot of policy change that needs to come, but I think we're slowly moving in the right direction, but we need more people in influence for sure. Oh God, that's a big topic. I think we could actually do a whole episode on this. We might get a panel together at a later stage. We'll
you could do
on.
that for International Women's Day in March.
We might do that for International Women's Day in March. That's a great idea. I will take that offline. Thank you. But coming back to work in itself, I was a BDR in 2015, 2016 in Salesforce. It's probably a different job between now and then. What are the changes that you've seen, and what are the challenges you and your team are dealing with on a day-to-day basis in 2024?
The changes or the challenges?
Let's start with the challenges and we'll move on to the changes.
Okay. So I would say, even though you're absolutely right, the world has changed a lot. At the end of the day, people buy from people. They don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, as Simon Sinek always says. And I'm a huge fan of his.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I always tell this to my SDRs as well, where I say, at the end of the day, there's all this optimization, there's all this AI, and there's all this generic outreach out there. If you're the one that personalizes, that comes across as a human, you're going to be successful. Because at the end of the day, even though, the role has changed and we might not sit at our desk in a cubicle office anymore, where I don't know if you remember these, but in order to shadow your colleague, you had those
the phone extensions.
Plug in. So those things luckily have changed and improved. So now I can go into Power Dialer tool, like Nooks or whatever they're all called, and I can, live shadow my team that is dispersed across the entire world, basically. So there's a lot of positive change, but at the end of the day, the basics that we talked about that you learn in this role, that you've experienced, they remain. So a lot of it is about the mindset and the motivation. Sales development is a very hard job because you're consistently faced with rejection, and nobody enjoys rejection. And that's why it's such a good school, because you learn about consistency, you learn about resilience, you learn how to deal with rejection, you learn how to negotiate, and you learn that whatever comes your way, you shouldn't take personal. And so those basic life lessons, I'd say that's what I mainly focus on with the team. So one of the mantras we have is focus what's in your control, right? So you can focus on your output, you can focus on improving your conversions, you can focus on your cold call skills. Those things remain. And those other things, if a customer has a bad day, those you can't control, but you can still control who am I reaching out to, when am I reaching out to them, how am I reaching out to them. And those things continue to be the main success drivers from what I see with my team. And what I see doesn't work is when you have a setup that doesn't incentivize collaboration, like when you have, a setup where AEs and SDRs are not aligned and not encouraged to collaborate, when there are lack of growth opportunities for SDRs. If you force people to stay in this role for too long, they're going to resign because it's not a role meant to be inherited for 5 years. It is meant to be, stepping stone. Even if people do not end up becoming account executives, it's still not a role most people want to do for 5 or more years. And other than that, I think that those still remain the biggest challenges in the role.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that. So I always throw in a book recommendation whenever I get a chance. And you mentioned Control What You Control. Read The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. It talks about that kind of stoicism philosophy. And it is true. You can't control whether somebody will reply to you, but you can't control the quality of your outreach and who you're reaching out to and why. And I also think there's a good expectation setting as well. So, for example, just yesterday, I was outreaching to someone who CEO of a £7 billion business, a pretty sizable, chunky company. Wasn't expecting him to reply, but I was hoping he'd connect me with people. And nobody's replied yet, but I can see that it's been opened about 35 times, which means my email has gone out to a group of people. So I think it's reasonable for me to assume that I'm going to get a reply. I don't need to bother that CEO again, though. And I think those are kind of lessons that kind of come with it. As you say, kind of the rejection and the patience element. I can't control when that reply will come in. Would I have to just be hopeful that it is, and in the meantime, move on to the next one and do that same kind of work? And that's a really, really important lesson it goes far beyond sales. It's in everything. If we look at our, most common stakeholder in sales that we would work with, or collaboration partners, like a sales engineer, they need to know that their AE is going to include them at the right time, give them enough access, give them enough time on a call. If that's done wrong, if a pitch deck is 20 minutes into an hour-long call, yes, he's really on the back foot then, but all that should be discussed beforehand. It's interesting challenges, to say the least. I want to delve on one more thing. Phone usage is an interesting one. It's a very, very close to my heart mantra, mainly because you have a 46% more likely chance of booking a meeting. With the younger generation coming through, their relationship with mobile phones and actually house phones, landlines, is very different. Do you get much objection to that, or are they comfortable with it? How does that work?
In full transparency, I mainly hire. It's a big part of the hiring process to ensure that people are not scared of picking up the phone. So as part of the hiring process, we have a mock call stage where we're pretending to call the prospect. And that stage is normally where I can decide, is this a person I want to hire or not? Because if we can say that it's not just the phone anymore. Like, you need multi-channel outreach. You need to continue emails. You need to use LinkedIn, social selling, video selling, all the stuff that is out there. At the end of the day, cold calling is not dead. And my teams at remote, I can tell you, this is not a secret, most opportunities are still generated by the phone as an opportunity source, right? As a channel source. And so that's why I tell my team it remains important to make your metrics and to make your calls. And it's just, what has changed is, I think, how you approach people on the phone and how you get phone numbers, because people what you mentioned, don't use a landline anymore. So we need to be more creative with how we can get people on the phone. So that has changed, because more companies are remote. People have mobile phones. Obviously, that's private data, so it's difficult to get. And so that has changed. But when you do get people on the phone, that, you respect their time, you do the upfront social contract, the basics are still the same, I would say.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm going to say this from the perspective of both a buyer and a seller, in that a well-executed cold call is generally actually reasonably well received. Even if they don't want to go ahead at the time, they'll go, okay, yeah, fair enough, you're doing your job. I think when it's a sloppy, ill-prepared cold call is where frustration is there. And I say ill-prepared, you may talk well, but have you got the right person? Are you really fitting your ideal customer profile and buyer persona? And that's where it's the work before you even begin to dial that number. And, a lot of people will know John Barrows as a sales guru and development expert. And as he says, you've got to earn the right to make the phone call. And that's why one of the more grueling tasks, in my view, is to compile that list of who can I call and what am I calling them for. And especially with something like remote, there's so much offering that it can do. Who are you calling and why? And that's a big one to really get.
This part exit, this I'm going to cut out and send to my SDRs because you're absolutely right. That's the key to success right there. If you call the right person at the right time. And it also, I'm sure you do it as well at Revolut, but the value selling aspect of it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the idea is to bring value to the prospect, even though it might just be a cold call. When you hang up, even though you didn't book the meeting, you must have been able to bring some value to that prospect, either questioning their current processes or learning about what it is that we do, ideally both.
Yeah.
And then,
And like I'm working with someone in Revolut right now, and it's not going to happen right now. I know that. But I have totally opened the person to the way of how cards and expense management can be different. I won't obviously get into that now, but he was really going, Peter, thanks. I had no idea this was possible. I didn't think this is what Revolut was. And that's where education is a massive part of sales development and sales' role. And I believe that will close sometime this year. And when it does, I'll be ready to take it and you just move on to the next one.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I believe I'll manifest it. Tell me, you're a very self-aware and accomplished person, Henny. What's your own leadership style, and how do you bring yourself to that so as the SDRs know they're dealing with the real you, and that you have been in their shoes and that kind of thing? And how is that affecting how you manage the team on a day-to-day basis?
Thanks for the compliment. I would say you already mentioned something. It helps that I've had the role myself. So it already establishes trust. I would say as a person, the values I have as a person, I try to bring into my leadership. That is empathy, that is authenticity. And so that's how I approach the team. And then I've mentioned this previously, but what I try to do, I meet everyone where they're at. People are so different. They have different personalities, they have different backgrounds. So I cannot expect one size fits all, one formula works for everyone. So I'm trying, it takes time to get to know that individual, to get to know how they prefer, what their preferred leadership style is, or what their preferred coaching style is, or what their preferred working style is. And so I invest that time and that energy, because managing 10 people requires a lot of my energy, because I want to, it's a lot of giving. So I start with why. I always start like Simon Sinek here again.
Yeah, I was going to say, you really are in the school of Simon Sinek.
Why are they here? Why did they become SDRs? What is it they're trying to achieve? And, let's be honest, we're in sales. So most of us want to make money. But that's the superficial level. So I try to go with every one-on-one, try to go deeper and deeper to see, okay, if you're here for the money, tell me, what are you trying to do with it? Are you trying to raise family? Are you trying to buy a house? Are you trying to, and really go more into depth? Are you trying to build status? You're trying, those things. And then it's much easier to, once you know their why, to apply this to the daily metrics and the daily tasks that are required, because they're tough. The consistency is a tough aspect of it. The rejection is a tough aspect. But if if I know their why, then they know their why. And then we can combine that and make them successful. So that's, I'd say, one of my recipes for creating high-performing teams. And then my values are like trust, communication, transparency, and mutual respect. And funnily enough, a lot of these values are part of Remote's values. So I think that's another lesson I had to learn, is look for a company that aligns with your personal values, because only then can you be successful as a leader. If there's a mismatch, you're likely going to fail, because, if not the senior leaders in the org, if they don't share the same values as you, that makes it very hard.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that it's a massive challenge for a people manager dealing with giving out a bit of yourself to get them to talk. And especially in a remote environment, it's very different when you're in a room face to face. Back when I was a BDR, my manager was a woman. She hired me, and she's had a profound impact in a way that she probably doesn't even realize, which was coincidentally a book recommendation. But it was Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And that book she said to me, Peter, this will change your life. I live my life by it. I read the guy's follow-up book. I'm waiting for his third book, and I listen to every episode of his podcast, but this is where
Wow.
you may not even, she probably didn't realize the effect she had on me in that and how profound that is, that a decade later, I'm still kind of living my life in that way. And it is, and I say living your life because when you're dealing with grads, you have a situation where, or early stage careers, they're still figuring things out. As we learn more about the human brain, we learn that, between 25 and 32 is the age that the adult brain fully forms, which means if you have someone 24 to 27, they're still developing as a person. And you're assisting that journey into who they are going to become. It's a responsibility that's kind of nearly hidden in the job of leadership, which is why leadership is all about people.
Thank you for uncovering that, because that's actually the part I enjoy most about my job. It is developing them and seeing them grow as a person, and potentially, the best, it's not about hitting your quarterly numbers that brings you the most success as a manager. It's when they grow into the next role, when they take on that next step. You're like, okay, it's like a bit, like a teacher or like a parent, where you're like, okay, they're growing up, they're going on to the next phase in their lives. And that's the most fulfilling aspect of the job, indeed.
And look, self-development is a nurturing role. And I will say, regardless of what someone may do in college, get their bachelor's or master's degree and they come out, everyone I know, I'm in my early 40s now, none of us had a clue what we actually wanted to do. But, my best friend from college, we didn't. And I don't think most people actually do. My best friend now, he was as he said, he married a sugar mama, he's a stay-at-home dad. He loves his life, but is an incredibly technical person. And all the tech companies would love to have him in a technical role. I would imagine as an SE, he'd be brilliant. Or a product designer, fantastic. I fear for the testers or the developers if he was a tester. But, he's no, I'm living the happiest life I can. And that, it's just figuring that stuff out. And I always think the most important lesson one can learn in kind of third level education and early stage career is critical thinking. And that is kind of our responsibility as experienced people to help people uncover that. Henny, one last question for the day, and then I'll let you get back to your day. And thank you so much so far. Looking ahead, what do you see as potential changes in sales development, and how would you recommend someone to either change career or move into it at that kind of beginning chapter of their career?
Very good question, and a very good final question. I would say sales development is evolving rapidly due to advancements in technology, due to shifting buyer behaviors, and just the growing emphasis on data-driven strategies. So there's a few main changes. That is the increased use of automation. Definitely something Remote is heavily focused on this year. And because we have a good team in seat, and we're really looking at what might be some tools that we can, implement. For example, Power Dialer is something we implemented now. What are the ways we can use AI to improve and become more efficient? But also, I'd say the data-driven sales development is a big trend and a big change, because now with all these tools that are out there, Sixth Sense, Momentum, you can really gather so much data on who is interacting with your company, with your content, when, where, and then based on that, I always tell my team, be like a spider web in front of your prospect, because they will come and they will latch on. It's just a matter of when and where. And if we can get that data and work with that, then we go back to what you said earlier about making a call relevant, calling that prospect when they're, already trying to gather information, calling the right prospect at the right time. And for that, this, increase of data-driven tools can really, really support the team and can also increase the output. I mean, let's be honest, back when we were SDRs, our targets were much lower because we didn't have all of these tools. Now the targets are increasingly getting higher and higher and higher and higher because that's possible now.
It is. And I think it's mastering those tools and putting a really good repeatable process in place. And what I kind of heard there is nearly an echo of how you manage is you meet people where they're at. So if someone is engaging with you on LinkedIn or X, then that's kind of where you've got to be, go referencing that point in your outreach and touch point. And that's a really, really important thing. as I say, as we kind of said at the start, sales development may not be the career that a person wants to spend as an IC for any long period of time. In fact, I'd probably call it burnout. But there are so many transferable skills that can go with you anywhere. And some of the best SEs I've worked with did SDR and BDR role first, and then moved into the SE role. As I say, it's still rejection. You're still talking in front of customers. There's so much value. There's stakeholder management. And, I think leadership is a funny thing because there's formal leadership and informal leadership. And I think everyone has to influence someone in some shape or form. And SDRs, who are arguably the most junior, have to influence a lot of people in a lot of ways. And so it's a great role to learn in. And I'm certainly glad to have done it. And I think it stood to me, and it sure sounds like it stood to you as well, Annie.
Absolutely. And you've made a good point there as well on that another one of the trends is that it's going to remain to be omni-channel. Cold calling, emails, LinkedIn, social selling, all of those things. And lastly, I would say a big change as well is, and a big trend, SDRs must be comfortable selling virtually. I mean, obviously I'm biased. I work for remote. I'm a big advocate for remote work, but remote and hybrid selling is not going to go away. And so if you learn that early on in your careers, you will continue to be successful along the line.
I remember as COVID was kind of settling down in terms of travel restrictions and things like that, we were trying to get to meet a customer in London. And they were like, well, we don't go to the office on consistent days. And we couldn't get them to agree, the customer, to get 4 stakeholders in the one room on one day. So we had to do the whole sales cycle virtually. And I think, adaptability is definitely something that's there. Henny, it's been absolute privilege talking to you today. You've been a fantastic guest. So many insights and takeaways. I love to hear your story firsthand. I know we had to catch up beforehand, and a lovely idea for International Women's Day. There's a good chance that I'll be back in touch with you on that. We really like that idea here. I suppose if anyone wants to connect with you, learn a bit more, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Cool. That will be in the show notes. Henny, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Pete.
But I think there's so many interesting things that AI can do, help us be better sellers. Like I'm
even just analyzing an annual report, you can get through a 150-page document in like kind of 10, 15 minutes as opposed to 2 hours.
Yeah. And as a sales leader, using tools like Gong and, it picking out for you, like, is this deal likely to close or not? Or like we rolled out this.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Like if you're rolling out new messaging to the sales team, are they actually using it on their calls? Therefore, like when I was in sales enablement, this would have been such a dream. We train people on it. Are they actually talking about it? And then, like measuring it down the line and going, are we seeing more sales of that product as a result? And